During winter break in 2008, me and 4 friends decided to rent a cabin. It was in the depths of nowhere, nestled deep in the snow-covered woods, perfect for some laid-back time. My friend Mia had found it online, a very rustic place with no Wi-Fi, and just the 5 of us, me, Mia, Chris, Ben, and Sarah. It was a perfect first day, board games, hot cocoa, and definitely plenty of wine. We crashed, and by that point, it had all seemed like the perfect getaway from college stress. On the second morning, I came out of the cabin and grabbed some firewood. It was then that I saw a little rusty key buried partly in the snow immediately outside the cabin's door. I reached for it and asked if any of my friends had dropped it. Everyone looked at me and said no. Chris said it could have been to the shed and pointed over a shoulder out back where an old ramshackle thing was. We tried it, but it didn't fit. Someone must have lost it. Possibly someone who stayed here before us. That night, we sat around the fire playing cards. The wind howled outside, and the old cabin creaked with the cold. I glanced at the key on the table, feeling a knot in my stomach. Something felt weird. Something felt off. Mia laughed and told me I was being paranoid, but then Sarah, who had been quiet this whole time, said, "Did any of you check the basement?" We all just looked at each other. None of us knew there was a basement. We all searched around and Chris found the door. It was an old wooden hatch under the living room rug. It had a rusty padlock, almost as if it was meant to stay hidden. My hands shook as I fit the key into the lock. It clicked. It was the right key. I hesitated, but Ben rolled his eyes and he said it was probably just storage. I pulled the hatch open and a draft of cold air hit my face. We went down the creaky stairs, the light from Mia's flashlight bouncing off rough stone walls. It was empty, but in the corner, there was a mattress and a small table. Empty food cans stacked in a corner. Someone had been living here recently. Suddenly, the floorboards above us creaked. Heavy, deliberate steps. We froze. Someone was in the cabin. Chris motioned for us to stay silent. We crept back up the stairs. The main room was empty. The front door stood slightly ajar, snow blowing in. They left. But were they inside while we were here? That night, we locked every door and window, the key scalding a hole in my pocket. None of us slept. The next morning, we found tracks leading from the basement to the woods. We never saw anyone, but one question would haunt us. How long had they been watching? And where are they now? The drive home for winter break was always long and lonely. Miles of empty roads, snowy fields, and nothing but static on the radio. I'd left campus late, hoping to avoid the holiday traffic, but now it was almost midnight, and the snow was coming down harder. About a few miles into my ride, that's when I saw him. A man standing at the side of the road, thumb out, his silhouette barely visible in the snowstorm. He was bundled up, his face hidden beneath a scarf and hood. I hesitated, but this was the early 70s, so it was pretty common to pick up a hitchhiker. Picking up hitchhikers wasn't something I'd ever done though, but this was in the middle of nowhere, and the temperature was dropping fast. I slowed down and rolled the window down a crack and asked if he needed a ride. He nodded and said yes. His voice was rough, almost a whisper. He climbed in, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He didn't say much at first, just stared straight ahead. I tried to make small talk, but that didn't seem to interest him either. I glanced at him from the corner of my eye. His coat was old, threadbare at the cuffs. Something about him felt off. I asked him if his car broke down nearby, and he didn't answer immediately, but eventually he said it was a few miles back. I hadn't seen any cars on the side of the road. Instantly, I felt my pulse quicken. Maybe I'd missed it in the snow, but still, something didn't sit right. The silence grew heavier. He didn't take off his hood or scarf. He didn't even warm his hands when he got in. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, even though I couldn't see his eyes. Then he finally said something and asked if I drove this road often. I told him, yeah, usually during the holidays and at the end of semesters. After I said that, he nodded slowly and told me it was dangerous out here and I'll never know who I'll run into. The way he said it made the hair on my neck stand up. We drove in silence for what felt like hours. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw headlights. It was a truck. It had been behind us for a while, but now was speeding up, getting closer, way too close. The man shifted in his seat and told me they'd been following us. I tightened my grip on the wheel and asked if he knew them. He didn't answer. Then the truck got closer, its high beams flashing. My heart pounded. He turned to me, finally pulling his scarf. His face was pale, his eyes were wide, and he told me not to stop. The truck swerved, its horn blaring. It pulled up alongside us, and I saw the driver, a man, expressionless, staring straight at us. The truck veered into my lane, forcing me to swerve onto the shoulder. The hitchhiker grabbed my arm and told me not to stop again. The truck was gone in a flash down the snow-filled road. I was shaking, terrified. I turned toward the man, sitting beside me. He was breathing hard. His face was still shrouded in darkness. Who were they? I asked him. He didn't reply. He just sat there silently, as if the last few minutes had never happened. A few miles later, he spoke again and told me to just let him out. I stopped the car and watched as he climbed out and disappeared into the snow. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. I never saw another broken down car, never saw the truck again. But every time I drive that road, I wonder, was he running from something? Or was I? Winter break parties were a tradition at Mason's off-campus house. Old, drafty, but big enough for everyone in our friend group to crash. This year, we all needed it. Finals had drained us, and the idea of a cozy party, hot drinks, and good music sounded perfect. The house filled up quickly. Friends wandered in, wearing layers over holiday sweaters. The laughter swirled in each room, and the smell of cider merged with cold air seeping in from the cracked windows. Mason and I did a quick head count, about 20 familiar faces, or so I thought. I was about halfway through my second cup of cider when I saw him. A guy in a dark hoodie standing near the kitchen. His hood was up, hands in his pockets. He didn't seem to talk to anyone, just stood there and watched. I nudged Mason and asked him who the person was. He squinted and said he had no idea. It was probably a friend of a friend. But something felt weird about this guy. Everyone here knew each other. Friends of friends, at least. And he wasn't mingling, wasn't acting like someone who belonged, just observing. I decided to ask around, yet no one here knew who he was. I tried to convince myself he was just shy, maybe waiting for someone, but the way he stayed in the shadows, not touching the food, never speaking, not having any drinks, it gnawed at me. Then I noticed something else, little things. My phone, which I'd left on the table, was gone. I found it later, but it was on a different table. Mason's keys were missing too. He swore he'd left them in the bowl by the door. We found them in the bathroom. As the night wore on, the tension mounted. The guy kept moving, drifting from room to room, but never leaving. Anytime I got near him, he slipped away, melting into the crowd. Finally, I'd had enough. I leaned in and whispered to Mason that we needed to ask who this guy was or he needed to leave. We cornered him near the back hallway, and Mason, without sounding mean, asked him who he was. The guy didn't answer, just stared at us and angled his head a little. Listen, I said, if you're here with someone, that's cool, but you're kind of scaring people. You're more than welcome to stay, but let us know who you're here with. He smiled and just went downstairs toward the basement door. We followed, but by the time we reached it, he was already gone. Mason flipped the light switch, but no one was down there. We went anyway. The basement was empty, bare concrete, old boxes, nothing else. Then we saw it. The little door at the back that was always locked was slightly open somehow. We opened it further, to reveal a narrow, concealed room. An old cot laid there, wrappers from eating food, a backpack. Someone was living here watching us. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing to be seen. Nothing was stolen, nothing was damaged. Just the terrifying realization that we'd been sharing the house with someone we hadn't invited. Now, whenever I go to Mason's, I check every corner and every door. We never found out who he was or how long he'd been there. It's been a little while since that incident happened, but thinking about it to this day still freaks me out.